The London system. This is one of the most hated openings out there. And it's because you could use this setup. It really doesn't matter what black plays. I'm just showing you some random moves for black. You can always play like this. And eventually your bishop is going to d3. We're going to be using chessreps.com to learn it. And it starts with d4 and bishop f4. You're always going to be playing this move. And again, this is chessreps.com. You play the incorrect move, they will tell you you're incorrect. Now, it's going to be a very simple setup. The pawn goes to e3, this bishop is going to d3, and this knight goes to f3. The London system can be played against anything. And then one little extra move that I want you guys to understand is this knight on f3 usually goes to e5, like most of the time. Now, after a move like knight to d7, from here it's just a matter of development. Again, this knight goes to d2, this bishop goes to d3, and that's how we're going to start our attack on the opponent's king. Just to show you how aggressive the London system could be, again, the pawn goes to e3, pawn e6, and we're going to play knight f3. We're always going to have this setup. And whenever they go bishop to d6, we don't want to take because it helps their queen to be developed. I mean, you could see the notes right here. We play knight e5. Now, once they castle, we're going to play knight to d2, just getting all our pieces developed. And once you're met with a move like pawn to c5, just play pawn to c3 to support your center. And then once they develop their knight, you continue with your development and you're fine. Now, usually if they take with the knight, that's just a fork and you're winning. Now, if they take with the bishop, you take with the pawn. It's very important. Take with the pawn, and it looks as if you're blocking in your bishop. And okay, they have two pieces attacking e5. You play knight f3. Now you have two pieces guarding e5, and then they play queen c7. Three versus your two, and there's no way for you to guard the e5 pawn anymore. But this is actually winning because we're going to hit them with a Greek gift sacrifice. Bishop takes h7 check. And then once the king takes on h7, it's just going to be a checkmating attack. Knight goes to g5 with check. And then if the king goes back to g8, there's just queen h5, and then queen h7 is going to lead to mate. But if the king goes to g6, usually the move is queen g4. But because the queen is now on c7, we're actually just going to play the move queen c2 check. Because any other move, for example, if he moves the king, let's say he plays king h6 or king h5, then queen h7 is just going to lead to a checkmate. So once he plays pawn to f5, now you en passant with check, taking the queen. This is just winning, by the way, but we can always throw in a check just so that way we save the knight, then we grab the queen, and then we win the game. So just remember, the London system is easy to remember and it's easy to play. You're going to be playing the same moves against anything. The pawn goes to e3, the knight goes to f3. Now, usually when they play pawn c5, I recommend that you play pawn to c3. But if you start by playing knight d2, you're fine. And then you play pawn c3. And this is basically the setup. The bishop is going to d3, you castle the king, the knight is going to e5, and you're fine. Doesn't matter what they play, you're going to be playing the same thing. Pawn goes to e3, knight goes to f3, knight goes, well, that's incorrect. That's incorrect. Bishop goes to d3, knight goes to d2, and then you're fine. And by the way, if you had played knight d2 before you play bishop d3, that's also fine. Enjoy the games. All right, some London games. Knight f6 was played, and as we said, it can be played against anything. So we're still going to be playing the move bishop c4. And this is basically a London versus a King's Indian. Let's just play all the London moves. Knight goes to f3, pawn goes to c3, bishop goes to d3. It doesn't matter what they play. Knight goes to d2. Okay, we have to be a bit careful, especially with this rook to e8 move because he's trying to play e5, and we don't necessarily want to get forked. Now, because we're playing against a kid, we don't want the pawn to move to e5, then to e4. So what I'm going to simply do is I'm now going to use the chance to move my pawn to e4. And then once he puts his pawn on e5, I don't necessarily have to take. I don't have to react to it. I'm just going to move my bishop. For example, I could just put my bishop on g5. It's pinning his knight to his queen. And if h6, I'm just going to pull the bishop back, maintaining the pin, and I'm fine. So he took the pawn. Let's just take back. And the goal from here is to get my king out the center of the board as quickly as I possibly can. So queen to d7 was played. I mean, he's trying to get out of the pin, but it would have been best to play h6 or develop the bishop. Let me just get my king out the center of the board. And the whole idea of the London is I don't necessarily want to use my time to learn and study and remember complex openings. So I'm just going to get out of the openings and then use my middle game technique. to win. So pawn to b6 was played. He's trying to develop the last piece. Makes sense. Now that all our minor pieces are developed, what's the goal from here? Get the major pieces in the game, which means I need to get my rooks and my queen active. Rooks needs files. So now I'm going to play the move rook to c1, putting my rook on this open file. And then the opponent decides to play bishop to b7. I'm thinking about playing bishop to b5, pinning the knight, but pawn to a6 is just an obvious move for him to play. So let's just continue to improve our pieces. This rook is not doing anything. Let's move it closer towards the center. Okay, knight to b4 was played. Now, let's look on the opponent's last move, especially since a piece is now on our half of the board. The a7 pawn is unprotected. The bishop is unprotected. They're both under attack. The good thing about chess is we can always solve both of the problems. So what I basically did, I saved the bishop and then used the same bishop to guard the pawn. And then from here, it's just a matter of following the principle of neutralization, which is to not allow pieces on our half of the board, which means a move like pawn to a6, definitely going to be playing that. Rook to e7 was played, and this is basically how you're going to be winning with the London. You just put all your pieces on good squares, as you guys saw that I did, and then the opponent just made a blunder. And what he did, he basically pinned his own knight. He moved his rook to e7, which means his knight is pinned. And what do we do when a piece is pinned? We PP on the PP. So pawn to e5 attacks the knight, and it puts pressure on the pinned knight. Okay, they take, it's the same thing. We're just going to take back. If the knight moves anywhere, we're just going to take the rook. Otherwise, we're just going to take the knight and we're just winning the game. So they decided to move the knight out the way. Let's just grab the rook. And then just like that, we're winning. Now, as we said before, whenever pieces are on your half of the board, you have to be careful. So this knight is on my half of the board. I was thinking about using the principle of neutralization to play a3, hit the knight, but then there's knight d3, forking the rooks. I mean, the bishop is there. I don't mind trading, but I'm just going to play queen to b3. It still attacks the knight, but at least the knight is not able to move forward. I'm also trying to play pawn to e6. That would be a very nice pawn break, just putting more pieces on his half of the board. And I want you guys to notice how all, not some, but all my pieces are active. Knight to d5 was played. And then, okay, let's look on the last moves. Okay, maybe the knight could go here. Doesn't do much though, so let's chase that knight out of our half. Now I'm assuming he's going to play knight back to a6 or knight c6. Knight back to c6 was played, and again, what piece do I have that is not doing much, and how can I improve it? This bishop on b1. It's on a decent diagonal, but it's pointing towards a pawn chain. With that being said, I'm going to play the move. Okay, is it bishop to a2 or bishop to e4? It's one of them. Let's put the bishop on a2. Basically, what I'm doing is I'm putting the bishop on a better diagonal, and I'm attacking this knight on d5 twice. Knight takes c5 was played, and that was another blunder. And I want you guys to see the trend that is happening here. We're putting our pieces on good squares, and then the opponents are just blundering. And this was a counting mistake. I'm guarding the pawn twice. He was only attacking it twice. So I just need to take the free knight and attack the queen. And then after bishop takes, my rook takes, and just like that, we're now ahead by even more material. Okay, queen to g4 was played. Another mistake. And this one is a drawback mistake because the queen was one of the main defenders of the knight. Now that the queen moved away, the knight is now only guarded once, and we're attacking the knight 1, 2, 3 times. Maybe he thinks I don't want to take the knight with a rook, but I know how to do math. Like, if I use my 5 points to take 3 points, I get three, I lose five. But then he still has to use his 3 points to take my 5 points, and then I'm going to take his 3 points. With that being said, I get 6 points, he gets 5 points. So he decided not to take. And I mean, maybe he's being clever because my rook is now pinned to a checkmate. Like, if you look closely, if I try to be greedy, and then just move away my rook, queen takes g2 is going to be a checkmate. So not a bad try by the opponent. But let's just play the move knight to f3 here. Just continue to improve our pieces. If he takes, I'm just going to take back. No, I'm threatening to run away with my rook because there's no little checkmating tricks that is here. Okay, queen moved over to f4. And it is attacking my unprotected rook. Remember, look on the opponent's last move. Check to see what it's doing. And I'm ahead by 7 points. I'm actually thinking of just taking on. Oh, that's a blunder. I'm not thinking about that. I'm not thinking about that. let's just move the rook out the way. Let's just move the rook out the way. Where do we put the rook though? Remember, offense is still the best defense. I was thinking about rook d4, but my rook is under attack. So let's pull the rook all the way back to d1. And if he wants to give up his bishop for a knight and trade, I'm all for that. I'm the one who is ahead by 7 points. So from here, it's just keep improving the position, punish them for their blunders. Okay, rook to f8 was played. He basically saw that I had this battery on f7, even though his queen was guarding it. And what do we do now? Let's just play the move queen to c4. Why queen to c4? I'm ahead by 7 points. I want to trade pieces off the board. So if he takes, I'm just gonna take back. Okay, this is not funny anymore, bro. Come on, you're 1100, man. That's a free queen. Guys, if you're gonna send the challenges, like the viewers want to see competitive games. That's a queen, bro. Now I'm ahead by 16 points. And he resigns. London system games, as we said, knight c6, doesn't matter what they play. Bishop goes to f4. Okay, pawn goes to e3. Knight goes to f3. So we're just basically going to be getting the London setup, and we're going to be constantly improving our pieces, constantly putting our pieces on better squares. Now, one thing I want you guys to keep in mind is the bishop belongs on d3, but in a lot of cases when the bishop goes to f5, and this is something that you're going to learn on Chessreps, you could play something like pawn c4, queen b3. You could also play bishop b5, pin the opponent's knight, then play knight e5. So let's go with the bishop b5 idea, since this one is a bit more aggressive, because now he has to be a bit careful. For example, if he continues to play regular moves, for example, queen d7, he's going to be in trouble. Now, so the only move that you guys could say, oh, how did you say I should have played anything? I could have still put the bishop on d3, but because the knight is on c6, I wanted to pin the knight and then pp on the pp. Because the knight is pinned, what are we going to do? We're going to put pressure on the pinned knight. And the good thing is, we are also attacking his queen. So he had to move the queen out the way. All right, so from here, I'm trying to put even more pressure on this pinned knight. So let's play pawn to c3, which is one of those London moves. Pawn to c4 would have actually been better. But, I just wanted to keep it in the spirit of the London system. And then I want my queen on a4. But not that he castle is king. This is just, okay, guy's asking to lose, actually. Yeah, guy's asking to lose. Here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to take on c6. And then once he takes, I check his king. His king is going to be exposed. If he keeps his king in the center, it's just going to be exposed the entire game. And if he moves his king to b8, then he's actually going to be checkmated in 9 moves playing the London, which is crazy. So let's take on c6. He takes with the pawn. Now we check on a6. The king has to go to d7. If he moves the king to b8, the game is over. So he saw it. He puts his king on d2. So let's continue with the London plan. Knight goes to d2. King is castled. Knight f3. Okay, you see, it's funny. He castled his king on the queen side, and then the king ran right back to e8. That's pretty funny to me. Let's get our king out the center of the board. My king is now safe. And then he plays pawn to c4. I have to be a bit careful about this move. Now, it looks as if, okay, all is happening is, he just blundered his pawn. But that's not the case, because the pawn was on c6. Moving the pawn to c5 means the queen now attacks my bishop. But here's what I'm going to do, because we know that offense is the best defense. I'm going to play the move queen to a4 check, which means I'm defending my bishop and I'm attacking his king. Now he has to be careful because the king is not able to move. He has to block the check, and he has to ensure that he's careful how he blocked the check. So pawn to c6, that was a careful way to block the check. And now I'm attacking this pawn on c6 once. With that being said, I'm now going to hit him with the move bishop to b7. Now I'm attacking the pawn twice. And then he plays rook to d7 to attack my bishop. Didn't even try to defend the pawn. With that being said, let's just take the free pawn. In addition to that, we're also pinning his rook to the king. Okay, knight to e4 was played. And I tell you guys this a lot. Whenever you're pinning someone's piece, you should PP on the PP. Don't be in a rush to capture the piece. Like, literally, where's the rook going? It's illegal for him to even try to move the rook. But here's what I'm going to do. Knight to e4 was played. We looked on the opponent's last move. We see what's happening. My unprotected knight on d2 is under attack. But are we going to move the knight? No. Why? Because offense is the best defense. So instead, I'm going to play the move queen to b5, threatening checkmate on the back rank. So now he has to play something like pawn to f6. And then after he plays something like pawn f6, then I may consider trading the knight because, I'm ahead in material. I'm about to capture his rook. I should want to trade anyways. So he did find pawn to f6. Okay, rook is still not going anywhere, but the knight is attacking my knight. So let's trade on e4 first. And what I'm going to do is I'm never, and this is important, please listen. I am never going to take this rook until he tries to get out of the pin. And that's when I'm going to take the rook. So that way I gain as much time on him as I can. Okay, so bishop takes on e4. I mean, that's a free pawn. Pawn c4 is also nice. My rooks aren't doing anything, so I need to get those in the game. Okay, let's just start by taking the free pawn on c5. Not taking the rook unless he tries to get out of the pin. Okay, pawn to g5 was played. My bishop is under attack. Have to put it somewhere. Instead of pulling the bishop back, I'm going to play the move bishop to b8. I mean, it's always best to move forward instead of backward. And I'm also attacking this pawn. Looks like the rook is guarding it, but it's not because it's pinned. And this is the whole point. This was the whole point. So you're watching this. You probably would simply grab the rook. But you notice what just happened? The moment he tried to get out of the pin, what happened? He actually blundered the rook. No, that's just a free rook. So if I had captured the rook from before, I would have traded, guide resign, put some London system games in on d4, b5, the bishop goes to f4. Anything they play, we're going to play or natural setup. Knight c6, pawn goes to e3, and then bishop to f5 was played. Now, in the London system, your bishop usually goes to d3. But sometimes their bishop is going to go to f5 before your bishop goes to d3. What should we do in that case? In that case, if a knight is on c6, it's best to put the bishop on b5. If you can't, however, your bishop is fine on the d3 square. For now, though, I'm going to play knight to f3, just to stay flexible. And then, because maybe he just plays pawn a6 here. And then on the next move, I'm going to consider playing this move bishop to b5. So pawn to e6 was played. Let's play bishop b5, pinning the knight. What's the plan? The plan is to pp on the pp with knight e5. And if the bishop goes to e5, I'm actually still considering knight e5, but he didn't. So he plays knight f6. The move that I'm about to play, knight e5, it's not a principled move. I'm moving the same piece more than once in the opening stage of the game. However, it's a good move because it's hard for him to add defense to his knight. Like, I'm actually gonna be winning material here. Like 6 moves into the London system, and yes, I'm gonna be winning material. If he tries to defend the knight, then he's gonna be losing more than just a knight. Well, he's not gonna lose a knight. He's gonna lose a pawn, at least a pawn. And if he keeps the rook there, he's gonna be losing the rook, and I'm gonna be losing the bishop. Okay, pawn to a6 was played. We're attacking the knight twice. He's only guarding it once. Yes, my bishop is under attack, but this is like danger levels. I'm still gonna take the knight because if he takes my bishop, his queen is hanging, and if he decides to take my knight, which he did, the pawn is unprotected. So once my bishop takes on c6, I'm attacking both the king and the rook. And now we're definitely going to be taking the rook. It's not like it's pin or anything. So let's just grab the rook. That's a free pawn on c7, but I'm already ahead by 3 points. Let's not be too greedy. Let's play knight d2. That's where that knight goes in the London. And then we're just going to get our king out the center of the board. Bishop to b4, pawn goes to c3. That's where the pawn goes in the London. And then once he moves the bishop, now I get my king out the center of the board. So he also got his king castled, but let me show you what just happened. The king was on e8 guarding the knight. The king no longer guards the knight. If you want to be good at chess, you need to be able to identify weaknesses. Whenever a king is in the center of the board, that's a weakness. If the king is exposed, that's a weakness. But one of the main weaknesses that you should be able to identify are unprotected pieces. I want you to notice how both the knight and the bishop is unprotected. And because both of them is unprotected, I'm able to hit him with queen to a4, attacking the unprotected bishop, attacking the unprotected knight, and we're about to win even more material. So he decides to save the bishop, which means we're going to be grabbing the knight. Now we're ahead by 6 points. The rook attacks the queen. Let's just move the queen out of there. And now it's time for us to get our major pieces, the 2 rooks, in the game. Okay, he puts the rook back on e8, not sure why. And now these pieces needs to join the game. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start by playing rook to c1. I mean, rooks needs files, by the way. So putting the rook on c1 is not a file. But, on c1, the rook has potential. The plan is to play pawn c4, which is a pawn break. He plays f6, and more than likely, he's trying to play e5, but still play pawn to c4. If he plays e5, that's fine. I'm the one who is ahead in material, so I don't mind opening the position. He took on c4. I could take with the rook, but taking with the knight still means the rook has the open file, and I'm the one who is ahead in material. I want to trade pieces off the board. Okay, he pulls the bishop back. He doesn't want to lose the bishop, so he saves the bishop. And now I'm going to play the move knight to a5, so that way I could move my knight out the way and attack this unprotected pawn. Like, my bishop could have still captured the pawn, to be honest. He plays bishop b6 to guard the pawn, and as we said, he's only guarding it once. I'm already attacking it twice. So bishop takes c7, and I'm still winning the pawn. If he takes my bishop, the plan from here is to take, put my queen on the 7th rank, and then checkmate him on g7. So bishop takes, now we play rook takes. Rooks on the 7th is in heaven. If my queen manages to go to d7, then it's game over. He saw that. He plays e5, which means his bishop is now guarding the d7 square. So what do we do here? Okay, here's a nice little tactic. Rook to a7. Notice how my rook seems to be unprotected on a7, but I'm actually trying to set up a removing the guard tactic. If his queen decides to take my rook on a7, then his rook on e8 is going to be unprotected because the queen is the only defender of the rook. And then I'm going to take the rook, and that's going to be mate. So he did not take the rook. And now I'm able to hit him with knight c6. More attacking move. This time my rook is guarded, but his queen is under attack. And I'm also trying to play knight to e7 check. If he allows me to play knight to e7 check, my rook guards the e7 square, and I'm going to be forking both his king and his bishop. Okay, so he moves the queen to c8, and knight e7 is now forking the queen, the king, the bishop. So he has to sacrifice the rook. And then once he sacked the rook, my rook guards the knight. I'm just going to grab his rook, and that's more material. Now we take the rook. It doesn't end there though, because the queen and the king is on the same line. So if he's not careful, I'm going to be able to play moves like rook to e8, checking the king, hitting the queen. For example, bishop to d3 attacks my rook, but offense is the best defense. No need to defend the rook if we're able to create a threat that has greater value. Once I play rook to e8 check, he actually has to move the king. Well, he decides to take with the queen, which means that's just a checkmate. Some London system games, and bishop f4 against anything they do. Knight c6, pawn goes to e3, knight f6, bishop goes to d3. And I could have actually played knight to f3 first, but a lot of times they try to put their bishop on f5 before my bishop goes to d3. And that's why I played bishop to d3 first. So if you choose to play knight to f3, then bishop d3, that's fine. Now let's play knight to f3. And there's this annoying knight b4 move that you need to be on the lookout for. So I may play the move pawn to c3. But what we discussed in the intro is the bishop goes to d6. It's fine to just jump in with the knight on e5, because if he takes with the knight, that's already a fort. So he decides to castle the king. Let's play knight to d2. This is exactly what we learned in the intro. And this knight on d2 is eventually going to d3. We're going to get working up the center of the board, and from here, it's just chess. Okay, so they take with the bishop. Let's play pawn takes. Now the knight is under attack, and he blundered the knight. I want you guys to notice how these people are blundering. You just play the moves in the London, and the good thing is that's a free knight, by the way. You don't necessarily have to think too much, and this is why people hate the London system, including me, by the way. I don't really like the London, but it gets results. So pawn to f5 was played, and okay, my queen is under attack. I'm gonna just en passant, so that way my bishop keeps the attack on his h7 pawn, and then I'm gonna castle my king. Where do I castle my king? Well, first of all, the bishop is on the same line as my queen, so I need to be on the lookout for this move pawn to e5. So let's just move my queen. Let's just play queen to h5. I'm also threatening to take his pawn on h7, by the way. You guys know that offense is the best defense. So whenever one of my pieces are under attack, yes, or there's a threat, Yes, I still move it away, but I try to move it somewhere where it attacks something. And now that he plays pawn h6, I can freely castle my king. Now I have options. Do I castle on the queen side or do I castle on the king side? I'm going to choose to castle on the queen side so that way I also guard my pawn on b2. But the opposite side castles will also make it way easier for me to checkmate his king. Knight to b4 was played. We spoke about this annoying move. Luckily, I'm the one who is ahead in material, and I'm actually trying to trade pieces off the board. So let's just continue with the plan. Knight f3. The knight can always go to e5, and oh, there's also knight takes a2 that I forgot to mention, but it's fine. If knight takes a2, king b1, and then the knight has to move. I definitely overlooked that though. Okay, knight went back to b4. I'm actually thinking about saving my bishop here. Let's save the bishop. I think his queen and his king could get in some trouble here. Like, one thing I'm thinking of is sacrificing my bishop and then checkmating him on h7. I'm also thinking about just playing bishop to e5, and his queen is going to be very, very close to being trapped. And another thing that I'm thinking of, which may be the plan that I go with, is to just play pawn g4 followed by pawn g5. So, for example, pawn b6, bishop e5, very nice move. But let's play pawn g4. This is basically a pawn star. And what we know about pawn storm is whenever there's opposite side castles, we want to launch the pawns up the board so that way we open lines for our pieces. So bishop a6 was played, he developed the bishop. Now we play pawn g5. And his pawn is now not able to take, and this queen is under attack. If he decides to take with his pawn, then queen h7 is just GG's, which means he has to move the queen. And then once he moves the queen, we're still going to be taking on h6, and his king is just going to be extremely exposed. So he moves the queen, we take the pawn, he took back the pawn, and okay, that's a free pawn, hits the rook. But let's play rook to g1 first. It's very important that we play chess with all our pieces, and we also know the importance of putting our rook on the same line as the opponent's king. He moves his queen to d7. I'm sure he's trying to play queen a4 followed by queen a2, but that's going to take too long. I mean, it's also time to checkmate his king. I am positive that there's a checkmate is here, especially since the rook is on the same line as the king. I'm looking for a discovered attack, and bishop to f7 check is the first thing that comes to mind. Why? Because it's a double check. The bishop checks the king, the rook checks the king, which means the king is going to be forced to move to h8 or h7, and then queen takes h6 is going to be a checkmate. So bishop to f7 check. The king has to step over, and that's just a checkmate.